to Innsmouth, stranger.
So, welcome everyone, and this is our panel on setting the table, weird fiction in gaming, and we have assembled some of the brightest and biggest names in UK weird fiction gaming. I think what I'm going to do is ask the panel to introduce themselves and their connection to gaming. So if we could start with Ivan, please.
Hello. Hello. I should be Laura Langridge, who's the lead writer of Lemon Difficult, but I'm Ivan Sarich, and I run a company that runs immersive Lovecraftian theatre and gaming.
I'm John Houlihan. I'm a writer, narrative director and game designer, principally for Modiphius Entertainment, but a few others like Monolith as well.
Hello, I'm Mike Mason. I look after the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game at Chaosium. I also write a bit of horror fiction with somebody I know who's one along from me who'll tell you more about that.
Hello, I'm Paul Fricker. I work with Chaosium, writing for Call of Cthulhu and Rivers of London. And as Mike mentioned, we do a podcast called Eldritch Stories, which are Eldritch Stories.
I'm David Cartwright. I'm an author and freelance writer. I've worked with companies such as Isolation Games, Onyx Path, Dirty Vortex, and White Wolf.
Thank you. So let's start with what makes weird fiction a good subject for gaming. I guess traditionally, if we look at war games, we have a very set pattern of two sides come together and have some sort of battle or conflict. I suppose Dungeons and Dragons changed that approach to some extent. But what is it about weird fiction that you think makes it so suitable for gaming?
Well, a lot of weird fiction stories have a particular shape. You kind of arrive, everything seems normal. There's a bit of a hint of something kind of weird going on, and then, yes, that's confirmed, then, oh my God, what's happening? And then there's kind of the aftermath or the conclusion. And I think part of what makes a game good, there's obviously surprise, but there's also the players understanding kind of what the grammar of the experience is. So that's something we try and do, is you kind of learn what the rules are as the kind of game's on during the start, when you're investigating and learning kind of what the different elements are, that's kind of understandable, and then you kind of accumulate knowledge about what the weird rules are until they become kind of quite normal, and then you kind of live with the consequences of it.
I think possibly the green-bottomed mic is more reliable than that one, because that one's
Is it cutting out?
Yeah.
You need to speak into it rather than against it.
Yeah, they're
Apologies. That was a little bit. So yeah, and obviously everybody likes being scared and being kind of startled and surprised, and there's kind of a rich vein there.
Well, I'll focus on one particular aspect. I think it gives you just a ready-made cast of enemies and foes to battle against. You've got mythic horrors from beyond the stars, you've got strange undersea races, you've got supernatural entities. And I think it just gives you a really interesting and intriguing cast of villains to battle against.
40 years ago, Chaosium released a game called Call of Cthulhu, which was the first horror role-playing game. It also happened to be also cosmic horror based on Lovecraft. And subsequently to that, I think maybe because it was the first one, that cosmic horror streak has kind of remained not only within Call of Cthulhu, obviously, but obviously in some of the games that have come later that have been inspired by it or reactions to it. And therefore, it's kind of almost part and parcel of certainly role-playing games that there's always been cosmic horror in them. We've never had a role-playing game of horror that hasn't had cosmic horror there before. So I think partly that's one of the ways to answer this question. I think, building on what you guys have said, absolutely correct. The other thing about why it works really well for role-playing games or horror is because nothing is set. There is no canon. There's also the formula. You don't have to just do the same formula every time, as in, go around a dungeon and hit things, steal treasure, go to a haunted house, deal with a ghost. You could do that every game, but Cosmic Horror allows you to kind of do completely different style of games and different scenario setups and different takes on things. So there's a lot of flexibility and freedom, particularly if you are a creator and you're a writer and you're developing scenarios. There's a lot of scope. You know, you could set a whole game on a submarine, or you could set one in a, you know, haunted house, or wherever you like, in an air balloon, a zeppelin. Go on.
I think from a game design point of view, if we contrast it with games like Dungeons and Dragons, those are games of acquisition where your character goes up in level. You're about gaining power, gaining treasure, gaining magic items, becoming more powerful in the fiction, which creates the story for your characters in itself. Whereas most weird fiction, and certainly, you know, I'm speaking to Call of Cthulhu, is not a game of acquisition. It's a game of attrition, really. You're fighting to... You're a normal person, which is one of the biggest differences, or at least you start off as a normal person in most of those games, which isn't what you do in a lot of role-playing games. So you're a normal person, so it demands a different kind of story. And often, you know, there is that kind of death spiral, if you want to call it that, in some form. So I think it appeals to a different audience. Often that's an overlapping audience, though. There are people who play Dungeons and Dragons, and then they'll play, you know, Call of Cthulhu as well, because they're different things. It's not an either-or. So I think the weird fiction, it just brings a different style of game design and a different style of play.
Yeah, I mean, the common thread that I've found in the weird fiction games that I've played and written for is rooting them in the real. So everybody has a baseline understanding of how the world works, what to, and the characters that they play. And then gradually things get stranger and stranger and stranger, and you turn the screws and you enter the uncanny valley where even the most commonplace things become threatening or scary. And I think that's where strange fiction really, really lends itself to RPGing and storytelling in general.
So Lovecraft obviously casts a huge shadow over weird fiction, and it's difficult to think of weird fiction without Lovecraft, though there are very many other authors, of course. In that sense, what are the particular challenges you find in adapting Lovecraft for gaming purposes, given that Lovecraft's worldview could be seen as very bleak and pessimistic, and we're all insignificant, that in some ways would seem to come up against the idea of playing certainly heroic fantasy and D&D like you mentioned. So what's the appeal of playing a character you know is going to fail horribly at the end? How do you approach that in your own particular gaming style?
I think anybody who plays or runs a strange fiction game works from the basic assumption that you're not there to win. It's not about the winning, it's about the experience, and it's about exploring the story and discovering the creepy and the weird and the otherworldly powers that are creating all this madness. Whether you get to solve it or not, that's the optional extra, that's the cherry on the cake if you get there. Everything else is about the story that you're telling through the game.
I think from a logistical point of view, when you're dealing with a Lovecraft story, often it's one protagonist. Not all of them, there are some. The raid on Kerwin's house in Statement of Randolph Carter's, 100 people go and like attack Kerwin's house, fantastic. But that's kind of beyond our standard role-playing game group. But so often, you know, we'll get a scenario or a campaign, and there can be a great story, just like with Lovecraft, there's a great story, but how do you adapt that into a role-playing game? Well, there's got to be things for the players to do, and there's got to be things for more than one player to do. There's got to be things that are... So it's got to be a sort of a meeting of game and story, and that involves alterations to both. I think often, you know, often at the gaming table, it's not like a Lovecraft story. There's elements of that. It's taking aspects of those, but sometimes it's more like Indiana Jones, or, you know, Scooby-Doo, or whatever it is at your table. But you're taking inspiration from, you know, those Lovecraft stories and elements from it. And the tone kind of, you know, goes up and down. Sometimes it will be quiet and serious, and other times you'll be laughing and, you know, It's a different mood.
I'm not going to regurgitate everything everyone's just said because I agree with all of that and that's all correct. So I'm going to say something else. I don't think there's a barrier for people entering and playing horror role-playing games or weird fiction-inspired role-playing games based on Lovecraft. I do think the barrier is more Lovecraft's racism and views that come out through some of his fiction that obviously come out in other ways as well in other material he's done. But I think as of now, as of today, this year, the biggest barrier for somebody entering into a Lovecraft-inspired game would be that and not anything else. And I think that's the challenge to overcome, is where we convince people that you don't have to endorse Lovecraft's racism to enjoy some of the concepts and ideas that he created through fiction and then other people have taken and run with. Just to kind of say something a little different.
Yeah, I think I think if we did keep strictly to Lovecraftian principles, as game designers, we wouldn't really have too much fun. I think my particular take on the mythos is more Howardian, I would say, than Lovecraftian. I.e., if you find some horror from beyond the stars, I think you, as a gamer, should be able to punch it right in the tentacles, and so I have a more kind of pulp kind of approach to thing. And I think that is one thing about writing within cosmic horror genre. It is one of its strengths is it is very flexible, and there are as many flavours of cosmic horror as there are authors and game designers working in it. But yeah, I punch it in the tentacles. That's what I say.
Yeah, this was a serious question we thought about because running a 24-hour sort of immersive experience, it's not going to be very much fun, just unremittingly bleak. You are insignificant and pointless. So it was a particular concern. And the way we kind of look to address it is by having the investigation part where you're discovering all the unpleasant stuff and making the links and having that kind of delicious kind of horror and kind of tingle. But the counterbalance to that are the players themselves. So the kind of common humanity, people coming together, sometimes competing against each other. But that kind of spark of, whatever it is, kind of love, companionship, in the centre of the unremitting bleakness, doesn't defeat it, but it's kind of a counterpoint, and it stops people from jumping out of tall buildings.
Just to add something back in that's not about the racism angle, before I blank myself, is basically you can't run a game of nihilistic cosmic horror every day of the week, as in your games, Call of Cthulhu, or insert your favourite role-playing horror game here. Every session can't be unremitting nihilistic horror. It doesn't work. It doesn't, it's not real life. Every day of the week we're not bouncingly happy. Every day we're not miserable, and you can't do it in the game. Otherwise, there is no level to it. It just becomes boring, and that's why the kind of fallacy of online about play Call of Cthulhu, it's a game where you go mad and die, is not correct. Actually, there's many people that play games and their characters don't die and go mad and all that. But maybe they do later on, or maybe they don't. Yeah, but not every game. And because if it was truly like that, it would be pretty dull. It'd be like playing a dungeon and stealing treasure every day of the week. And who wants to do that?
Of course.
Yeah, I just it might come up in the panel later. I think that there's often quite a humorous undercurrent at gaming sessions that I've played. Some of the gaming, especially cosmic horror, has been some of the most hilarious times I've had when unexpected things happen and the table just dissolves in laughter. So I think this idea that it's a sort of bleak experience where we can't, we can't enjoy it and have fun with it is not true.
And I think it's a general thing that there's more humour in Lovecraft and Lovecraftian work than it is often given credit for. Which we'll be talking about a little later on. So let's look at game mechanics then. What is your approach to game mechanics? I suppose again D&D was the prototype, if you like, and games generally tend to follow that basic sort of pattern. But I'm very interested to hear, in particular with Key of Dreams, for example, how do you approach the actual game mechanics?
Well, our goal, so much lighter touch. I mean, I love Call of Cthulhu, and obviously there's lots of live action kind of versions. But the idea is that if you don't have any interest in gaming at all, you can still come and experience kind of a show and just approach it in a different way. So the key thing is having, I guess onboarding, it sounds very dry, but having kind of in-world kind of experience where you can learn what the rules of the experience are. When you go to the theatre, you kind of know what the rules are. You don't stand up and shout or whatever it is. You know, we know how to behave in those sorts of situations. In an immersive kind of theatre environment where you've got agency and you can kind of respond, unlike a kind of a role-playing kind of environment, you don't really know what the rules are for that particular experience. So, you know, some people can I talk to you, can I ask you to do something? Am I supposed to pick this up? So the first thing is kind of, I guess, teaching people those, and those are very, very basic, I guess, kind of rules and kind of mechanics. And then we obviously can't send people kind of mad, but by kind of following...
Technically, they can't.
I mean, the insurance won't cover it. So we have to, by breaking up kind of the experience into kind of 3 different sort of sections. Like I said, like a traditional kind of horror story, we start, you do light touch, and then you're unveiling more and more rules. So by the time you get to kind of the nighttime portion, when everything's going, technical term, batshit, and people are doing kind of mad things. People are doing rituals and kind of doing the biddings of cults and stuff, and it feels natural, I guess, because they've built up to it. They've kind of done some tasks for them. We just want to do this little job for us, and then it kind of builds up and builds up more. Now, this is very different, I guess, to kind of a role-playing game where everyone is very kind of invested from the start. They've kind of done the work, they know the rules, or the GM will kind of explain, or the keeper will explain the rules to them, and they've invested in a character and all of that. So kind of a lighter touch, we need to kind of think more about how do the rules and the mechanics make people feel. So even something as simple as a voting mechanic to decide something. I know that as a man of a certain age with a loud voice, if there's a vote, I probably will have a disproportionate effect and will be able to make some people feel kind of a little bit uncomfortable, like their voice doesn't count, even though technically everyone has the same voice. So each mechanic that kind of we use, we kind of need to think about, well, how does that make the participants feel? And maybe that's a feeling we want. Maybe we want people to feel powerless, but then it's just a conscious choice.
Well, I'm going to be somewhat heretical here and say mechanics don't really count at all. Being on the narrative side of things, I've always been a narrative rather than a mechanics kind of guy, and I think it's mechanics are there to help you somewhat in sometimes, but other times you can just completely ignore them, because I think the rule of cool is what really works in gaming. And if you have to throw out a rule set just to give your players a great experience, throw out the window.
People for many years have said to me, I love Call of Cthulhu because the rules don't get in the way, and we play the whole game without using the rules. And when you kind of strip that top of the onion apart and look under the layer beneath, they were using the rules, they just didn't realise it, or they didn't think about it. It just became second place of the game. So I always take it a pinch of salt. People don't use rules because actually they do. They might not roll the dice because they've consciously decided actually that bit of roleplay you did, oh yeah, you persuaded that NPC because you persuaded me as the GM or keeper. That's cool, as you say, you might ignore that. But I'll tell you what, when that deep one goes to hit you and you try and dodge it or you try and fight back, I bet you rolled dice then. did you use the rules? It's all narrative, apart from the time Anyway, so I think rules are really important. But I think there's like anything, there's a scale, isn't there? And things can be very, very rules heavy. They can be very light touch, almost non-existent. And we tend to call that narrative gaming. But there are rules. And even if they're very minor, but there are rules. And it's, and everyone's got a preference for how crunchy they want to be or not crunchy at all. And that's cool, yeah. There's a million and one games out there. Go and find the one you like, and if not, it doesn't exist, go and write it, I guess. It's not an issue. But I think rules are, useful, particularly in the game context. They're less useful, perhaps, in the context when you're playing with your friends you've been playing the same game with for the last 30, 40 years, yeah? I think rules might slide a little bit there sometimes because you've got a shorthand of knowledge. You've actually formed your own set of rules, which are just cues, social cues and whatever. But I think, you go to a con like today and you went to the game with some people you've never played before, I think the rules are really important then, because then you're all on a baseline. Otherwise, I'll turn up with my 20th level librarian with 500 hit points, and, they need rules. My character's the best. I will win at Cthulhu today, thanks very much. I could go on.
Are you two disagreeing about
I was saying I agree, partly. No, I agree. Rules are important, and I was being a little bit of devil's advocate there, but
Just being cheeky.
Yeah, I'm being cheeky. We've got books to sell as well, right?
So I think what Mike said, some people sort of say, oh, we like the game, the rules don't get in the way. I think the problem is when the rules do get in the way. Because with some role-playing games I've played, and they're games. This is the thing that people forget, I think. It's role-playing game. The G in RPG stands for game. So, and that can be really light rules, or it can be very, very crunchy rules. And it just depends on what you like. Some people, that whole spectrum, some people, they like the whole spectrum. And I think where the rules are good is when they help you tell the story. When a dice roll or a decision about a rule actually, it can actually help the atmosphere of the story. So we've got a thing, pushing the roll in Call of Cthulhu. So it's like you've attempted something and it's failed. Do you want to push the roll? It's like, do you want to really exert yourself? Do you want to spend more time, studying these arcane books or whatever it is, so that you can get a second roll? Well, yeah, I do. Okay, but I'll just do that then. But there's going to be a consequence. So if you fail it a second time, there's a bad consequence. You've perhaps it was studying a book and you failed the roll second time. You've fallen asleep over the book in the middle of you're in the cultist house and you're poring over the book, and next thing you know you've fallen asleep. And then there's a knock at the door and the cultists have come home and you're still there. So it's helped you develop the story because you failed that roll. And I think that's when the rules are good. When I say to the players at my table, do you want to do this? Okay, well, do you want to do this thing? You just need to roll now. And they're like, oh, well, actually, I'm not sure we do want to do that. And you see what it's building a kind of apprehension of the situation. And that. So I think rules that build fiction, thumbs up from me.
One of the things I learned from years of playing cooperative online games, from playing tabletop games, and from playing live action games was you don't need monsters to kill players, because players are really good at themselves. So when I think I was on my second contract for Onyx Path, and I was working on Dark Eras 2 and Arthur's Britannica, and I was working on a Hunter-Con pack for the Black Knight. And I was taking these old English, Irish, and Welsh mythological magic items and turning them into weapons and armor for the Black Knight. And I contacted the project coordinator and said, I'm struggling to balance these. I'm not sure. I think they're overpowered. And he contacted me directly back and said, that's not your job. That's the games master's, the game runner's job is to balance when and how they're used. And if they can't do that, then maybe they're not that great a GM. As the creator, all you have to do is make them fit, make them work, and make them thematic to the game. So, yeah, I mean, when it comes to implementing rules, as creators, we just lay them down. It's the people in the room who dictate how those rules are used. We can't make them one way or the other.
Not so much rules as a guideline. Okay, so let's move on to developing scenarios, because I think one thing I remember when Paul, you came on the IBC, us chatting about was this idea of, I thought that developing a scenario was very much like developing a story or a novel. it seems to be a very similar process in terms of developing plot and characters and everything else. So do you have a particular approach to developing scenarios, and where do you get your ideas for those scenarios from?
Did I disagree or agree when I was on the show?
I think you agree.
Did I?
Yes.
All right, okay. Just so
It's a very agreeable chat.
continuity. Do you want to begin?
The thing is, you can't dictate where players are going to go. So when you're writing a scenario, there needs to be a certain fluidity to any setting. I prefer, again, running Dresden Files and writing for the Contagion Chronicles for Alex Path. It was about setting up a sandbox, a believable setting with a few kind of key point events that you steer the players towards to progress the story, but with enough sort of freedom and background information for the game runner to improvise if the players go off script, as it were.
I think in terms of writing a scenario for a role-playing game, there's no one way to do it. There's no one starting point. If you talk to if you've never done it before and you talk to a person, they'll tell you how they do it, perhaps, and you think, oh, that's how I must do it. Well, I'll tell you it's not. Because we've worked with lots of different people, and everybody has different ways of doing it. Some start with the historical research, and they'll start with an event that happened in 1968, and I'm going to build on that. Or they'll start with the place. I really like New Orleans. I'm going to start with that. Or they just start with a situation. Or this guy, they fall into a hole and they can't get out, and there's some monsters. And so everybody starts with a different point. And I think the thing you've got to start with is something that excites you. You just got to look for something that excites your imagination. Don't worry if you think other people won't get it. Just build on that. Build on it and build on it and build on it, and keep sort of following that, things that excite your imagination. And then use a structure. So for Call of Cthulhu, we have a structure that we present the scenarios in, and just start building into that. So you've got dramatic personae, all the characters that are involved, you've got locations, you've got opening scene, you've got all these various things. And as you start to use that structure, you take your idea and sort of build it into that structure, you'll get a scenario. And also, like you were saying about how it's a kind of a bit of a sandbox and you sort of let people sort of enter, I think you've got to give people different ways of interacting with it as well. Because the way you see it and the way you design it will probably be for you, but other people will come at it from a different angle. So just building in flexibility for, or maybe you use pre-generated characters, but maybe they want to use the same characters they've been playing a couple of years. Well, can they fit into it as well? Different ways of starting the scenario off.
Did you ask where we get our ideas from? was that part of the question? There's a guy who works down the chip shop, he's a deep one. I give him a fiver with my chips and he tells me an idea. Okay, so look, as Paul just said, as you illustrated, there's a million and one ways to write a scenario, so there is no point, because we have not the time to do it in detail here, so I'm not going to say any more, because what these guys have said already, what I'm sure you'll contribute to, is all good stuff. What I will say, the one thing you must do, no matter how you write your scenario, is get somebody other than you to run it. Yeah, especially if it's your first one. What you want is someone to run it and come back to you and say, well, maybe you watch it, but don't play in it. You just sit and watch and keep quiet and don't interfere. You're allowed to make notes, but that's it. Watch somebody else run your scenario and see if it actually is your scenario anymore. Because the one thing I'm trying to get to is to say to you, there are things in your head that when you write the scenario may not actually end up on the paper because you forgot to put them in. But when you run it, you actually do that. But you didn't write that in the scenario, yeah? You're nodding a lot.
It was obvious, Mike.
It was
obvious that you've got to do that thing.
Yeah, but because everyone else just can't read your mind. So the best way to really illustrate that and to check whether you've done it right, get somebody else to run it and you watch. Get them to video it or whatever, yeah? Because then you can go, actually, that's exactly how I run it or how I imagine it. Yeah, the players did some few things differently and the GM coped with it and all the rest of it. That's all cool. But ultimately, yeah, when they went in that room, you know, the Shoggoth did come down on the roof and it did do this and do that, you know, because that's what I'd written down. Yeah, so that's my tip at the top. One thing you must do, get somebody else to run your scenario and see whether it's the same scenario that you wrote.
I'd say that was totally the same for when you're writing even a short story, because in your mind you know, the butler is actually the vampire. Because you know that, it skews the way you read your own story. So my long-suffering wife is always saying, but why did he do that? Oh, right. Oh, yeah, thanks. So you have to have that extra set of eyes on, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a million and one ways to approach writing a scenario. I mean, when it comes to Acts and Cthulhu, which is what I run, it's very firmly based in history, so Second World War. So, but what's quite interesting is to take like real world events and real world parts of the Second World War and explore what might be happening around the edges of that from a sort of secret war or Lovecraftian cosmic horror kind of approach. The one thing I'd say when it comes to game design is always to have the player in mind and think, how is a player going to approach this scenario or mission or problem that I've set them? I totally agree with Mike when it comes to learning about how successful that is. Give it to someone else. I mean, run it yourself as well, I would say, but give it to someone else and see how they handle it and what the reactions of the players are. Mission scenarios, campaigns, they really do benefit from a lot of play testing and refining, because you're totally right. How it appears in your head is not going to perhaps last too long when it gets in the hands of players and GMs. So yeah, lots of play testing, and think about, like in most things, think about your audience.
So I'll start with, I guess, kind of the inspiration kind of side. Well, one of the things that we love is mixing real kind of historical events, and particularly kind of local history, with kind of the real world. There's this term that was coined in the 1960s, apophenia, which is sort of a madness of seeing links in everything, kind of the red string thing, the kind of Dan Brown. And to try and induce that in the audience or the kind of players is kind of partly my private personal goal, to kind of, so people can look and, well, that is that linked to that, because it seems kind of real, and for people to go away and do a little bit of research and say, well, yes, there was this actually person and they did this long, but what else is actually true and what isn't? So that's, and obviously there's the whole wealth of kind of weird fiction which we draw on. I guess our scenarios are a little different, a little kind of unusual, so I'm not entirely answering this question in the way that it was kind of asked, but we have additional problems, which is, I guess, kind of a distributed system. So you've obviously got a sandbox, because players, the audience, can go anywhere they want. We have 5 or 6 actors that each need to be able to kind of facilitate, and then we've got all of the props and the written materials and the building and everything else that's kind of happening there that all needs to somehow fit and draw together and make you feel like it's some sort of story, some sort of coherent whole that isn't just a procession. Now, running a kind of a tabletop, I mean, I run a tabletop as well, obviously, as the DM or the keeper, you have kind of entire control of the world, and obviously players will still inevitably surprise you and do things that are unexpected that may break things. But when you can't entirely control where someone's going to be in a building kind of at any particular time. So we create, kind of like was kind of said at the start, I guess kind of a setting, and the actors have an awful lot of reading to do to kind of understand the world and the rules of the world. There are some particular scenes that are researched and then rehearsed, and then the rest of it is just, I guess, kind of character work in relation to things that people discover, things that people research, documents that people find, objects, and then there are certain kind of key events that happen. And the biggest difficulty for me is letting go, because I have spreadsheets and documents behind me, and it's just going away and then trusting the actors and the performers to actually know all this stuff and do the stuff. And so I find it very difficult to go out and actually observe them, but it's those moments of gorgeous moments of emergent play where someone does something unexpected that then triggers kind of something else. And yeah, you get that in role-playing games. And
so I think one of the key components of weird fiction and Lovecraft in particular is this idea of atmosphere over character. And I remember even back in the early days when we first started playing Call of Cthulhu, it would generally be a certain setting. We'd have some certain types of music playing, and that sort of stuff to establish a mood.
Space music.
Space music, yeah. Disco, treehouse, funky. I mean, that went even further when we started playing Vampire Masquerade. That all got very candelabras and Hungarian violin stuff. So, given that, do you have any tips now? Again, for you, you kind of asked it already in a sense. Any tips for a setting for your gaming or establishing that mood and atmosphere?
I mean, there obviously isn't a lot you can do about the place unless you're going to hire somewhere, which obviously kind of most of us aren't actually going to do. But yeah, I mean, something as simple as lighting and the right kind of music set. And some people go to incredible lengths to curate a music list. And if you can do that, that's absolutely brilliant. I don't always have the patience. So it's normally just kind of one or two pieces of music. Sorry, this is me personally running kind of games rather than kind of us. We're very we have soundscapes, anyway, fine. But just to answer the question, the individual bits of music that kind of catch that kind of theme or that kind of impression. And then the important thing there, obviously, is that they're common terms of reference that everybody understands. So, yeah, I mean, light makes a huge amount of difference. I mean, you say candlelight. I was a goth vampire player as well, I think. But yeah, it makes a huge amount of difference. But as long as you don't accidentally set fire to your character sheet when you're kind of leaning over the candle, which has embarrassingly happened to me.
Candelabras and frilly shirts is not a good combination.
No, maybe not frilly. Costumes, I find, don't really, in my experience, haven't really kind of helped. You just kind of feel a little bit awkward sitting around the dinner table, kind of in a costume. Yeah.
So yeah, I'd certainly endorse lighting and some kind of atmospheric music as good scene setters and mood setters. I think one thing that can really help as well is props. So if you have printouts of documents that you've worn and kind of ancient manuscripty things for the players to handle. Players just love handouts and things like that. So if you've got some authentic kind of artifacts from the scenario you're playing, maybe even a small candelabra, or in our case it could be a World War II weapon or something like that, or even models or things like that. I guess also if you are going to go on the route of virtual tabletops and things like that, you can do some amazing things with the technology. Minis nowadays can help build atmosphere and stuff. So yeah, there's quite a few things, but I'd recommend props on top of the music and lighting.
All of that. But if you really want to get your players in the mood, if you, before they come, get loads of plastic sheeting and put it all the way around the nip to the butchers, get some pig's blood and some offal, and when they come and sit down, before you really start, just start throwing that around the room, and on them, that will get a good atmosphere. Please don't do that. But seriously, I think obviously, all the above, absolutely true. One thing I think often doesn't get said is before you start, maybe even before you get together, maybe your pre-get together if you do a session 0 or whatever it may be, or just when you're chatting about, hey, let's do a game, have that conversation. What are we? You want to run, Cthulhu by Gaslight, let's say, and we all want to, let's play that. That's great, okay. But rather than just end the conversation there and say, so what do you want from the bar? Go and say, okay, so what style of game do we want to play? Yeah, is it going to be Scooby-Doo at that end? Is it going to be grim darkness at this end? Where are we? And do we want that every time we meet, or is it every third session's a comedy one? Obviously, what I'm saying is you just try and have a conversation about what are the expectations, setting the tone. And so saying, so we're all agreed we want to have candlelight because we want to kind of, when the game starts, we're going to meet at 7:30 every time, but the game starts at 8, so at 8 o'clock, we're on, and everyone's in the game. Or it's going to be, 8, half 8 start, drifting, because you try and be realistic and set your expectations, and that will help your tone and mood of the game as well, because if you talk about it, it can happen.
Yeah, not much more to add from all these guys have said. I think one thing, all those things, lighting and props and so on, fantastic. But you can't always control those if you don't have them in advance. And perhaps you're playing at a venue like, we've got tables, there are tables here today. It's very hard to get that atmosphere in a venue, such as we've got today. It is what it is. It's a room, there's daylight, there's people walking about. It's very hard to capture a spooky, intimate atmosphere. But I think the only thing you've always got is your voice. And just using different tones of voice. And I'm no actor, but you just try and sort of think, well, how would that feel to be in this situation? Are they scared? Are they angry? And just try and communicate that through varying your tone of voice, and that I think that just adds to the atmosphere. The other thing from a role-playing point of view, I think, is when you do that, the players respond in kind. So if you speak in character, if you never speak in character as the GM, players probably take that as a sign not to bother. Whereas if you speak in character, when they try and speak to the NPC, if you respond in the voice of the NPC, it's a kind of prompt for them to do likewise. And I think that builds the atmosphere of the game.
Sometimes something really, really small can have a really, really big impact. I'm going to give you a specific example of a game that I ran many years ago now. A bunch of friends over for a full weekend, full 48-hour session, and it was an aliens game. And they were all playing Colonial Marines. So we started off the session, and they go to the outpost, and they sweep through the lab, and they don't find everything, and they're kind of deciding what to do next, when on my laptop I had a pre-prepared sound file. And they're like, what? And that was it. For the whole session, whenever I hit that little button and that sound went off, oh my God, they panicked. So yeah, I mean, more recently, my friend Rob has got a couple of Call of Cthulhu campaigns on the library. They're uploaded to Chaosium, and he wrote one called The Vernica Boxes, and it's a great campaign. I really do recommend it. But if he had like a little mother of pearl inlaid decorative box in the middle of the table while we were playing, we'd have been terrified of it. Yes. I mean, music definitely, lighting, yeah. But sometimes all you can control is like the smallest thing. But if it's a repeat thing, if it's a constant in the room or through the campaign, when you've got the opportunity, then that can really help you.
I think I mentioned before, I certainly mentioned it on the podcast, my reminiscence of that is when we ran a scenario called Grace Under Pressure, where everyone's in the mini-sub and something's tapping on the window, the usual stuff. But I just had a loop recording of just that sonar sound going for hours. And that, so small things like that can work really well. Okay, so does anyone have any questions for our panel? See if we get any. I'd like to raise your hands. No? Yes. Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Since some of you have worked on a variety of different games and for different companies, including existing IPs like White Wolves and Onyx Paths, what your feelings on adding cosmic horror to a game that might not already support it, like adding it to the personal horror of BTM, or adding it to people try and add it to D&D all the time, and they mainly get squids that give you a headache. It has tentacles, it does psychic damage. That's cosmic horror, right? So, what are your thoughts and feelings on adding cosmic horror to something that might not have had a place for it before you got there?
Well, this is something that I think I have more actual practical experience of, but I completely kind of take your point. Cosmic horror is kind of in vogue, I guess, at the moment. I guess you're seeing a lot more in kind of in the media and in kind of generally kind of in the culture, and it is crowbarred in, and obviously it just doesn't work because you need to have kind of a balance. There needs to be, I don't know, something that evokes that and isn't, as you say, kind of just tentacles. And often it's just the has the trappings that kind of emerge. And I mean, I guess the simple kind of answer is that people are going to add it if they think they're going to sell more of that particular thing, but they shouldn't if it doesn't fit.
Yeah, it's. I mean, it's a tough one. I'd echo that. That you see it crowbarred into things, perhaps that are just not really suitable for it. I mean, it's quite hard because I work in that genre, so I don't really see too much outside. But yeah, I just echo that sentiment. I think you can soon tell when it doesn't really fit in a particular role-playing game. So if it doesn't fit, don't use it.
Do we mean Cthulhu, the word Cthulhu for cosmic horror here? Because basically that's what I've heard, is that if you stick Cthulhu on something, you might sell some more. Is that what we're talking about?
Some more tentacles, yeah.
So I was more asking, how would you pull it off if you were adding something where it wasn't previously? How would you pull that off?
Okay, well it gets in this, it's surprisingly found in many places you won't expect it already. Warhammer 40k, for instance, where I was writing Dark Heresy, and we never mentioned the C word Cthulhu, but it's got plenty of cosmic horror in it that maybe had been inspired by me and other people. Yeah, I mean, you have a choice. Basically, if you're going to do that, you have a choice, which is what these guys are kind of talking about as well, is you either do it overtly or you hide it. And depending on your choice in that matter, can determine how successful it is. If it's overt, it's got to be pretty good to make it work. It's got to, as you say, fit the bill. Because otherwise, it just looks like you've slapped Cthulhu on the front of this board game or whatever game, to sell it. So often the better is to kind of subvert it and kind of, you hide a few little Easter eggs without saying the C word Cthulhu, but you mention, I don't know, R'lyeh, or you mention the King in Yellow, or something like that in a TV series. And suddenly, those in the know go, I'm in the know. I know, oh, that's cool. That's cool, yeah? And so a lot of it comes down to however or subtly you use it. And often, in terms of looking at you lot, us lot, we actually quite like it quite subtle sometimes, because it means we know and nobody else does. Maybe that's the criteria, I don't know.
If I can just add just something kind of quick there, because that's a really brilliant example. True Detective, the reference there. It is also an Easter egg, but more than that, I think that because you're, I guess, kind of drawing on a kind of heritage and a kind of tradition and kind of all the rest of it, if you do it in the right way, it gives it a hinterland, to sound pretentious, but it gives it kind of a depth that feels kind of more true and kind of creepier because you're kind of doing it. And obviously people that are in the know, but even people that aren't, they're just casually aware, it kind of feels kind of true.
Feels like some depth there.
Exactly, yeah.
I mean, taking it back to a literary convention today, I think if you were writing a short story and you wanted to put cosmic horror in it, well, that might feel cliched. I think it's just avoiding the cliche. So if you're putting it into a game, don't just do, I don't know, D&D with Cthulhu or whatever it is. I mean, if it's dressed up in the right way and you've got some great ideas and you express it in a way that's interesting and not cliched, could be great. Everything's already been done, but new things are going to keep getting done. And some of those new things are just, people are just going to say, well, that's just like the old thing. But if they're done well and done with a vision that people haven't, expressed already, there's always room for new ideas, I think.
I can recommend you what I think is an example, especially since you referenced Vampire the Masquerade and Onyx Path's Chronicles of Darkness. Pick up the Contagion Chronicles. It's again set in that world of supernatural entities, but the Contagion Chronicle is about a reality virus.
Old or new?
The recent one, and yeah, that brief felt very much like we were adding cosmic horror elements to the established Chronicles of Darkness. So I'd say have a look at that. You might agree with me, you might not, but it felt like it while we were doing it.
Okay, thank you, folks. We're going to have to wrap things up there. We really want to do a full weekend next year. We've got so much stuff to pack in, but we have to move on. And I'd just like to say, as a gamer of some years, I think we're in a golden age of gaming at the moment, surely. We have so much choice, we have so much great material coming out, so many good systems and events we can go to and experience, thanks to the work of people like our panel here. So let's hear your appreciation for them. Thank you.